Hello all.
Right.
This is Troy standing in for Barrett, who hopefully is having a great holiday. Just wait for a few minutes for some more people to trickle in. I don't know how many to expect today. Welcome all to the Cloud Foundry Kubernetes SIG for Tuesday, August the 18th, 2020. Talk amongst yourselves. I anticipate we'll be a little thin on the ground today because of KubeCon and because of vacations. So
That's what this week is. Tell me to shut up as soon as we get to the point where you actually want to talk about the important stuff. Has anyone here attended KubeCon online?
I've lurked.
Yeah. Is it worthwhile? We didn't bother sponsoring because I was like, if I can't stand in front of people and have a conversation with them, there's not going to be a huge amount of value for us. But have you found it valuable so far?
I can't speak for the people at SUSE. I mean, SUSE went all in, and there's a lot of the organization that is participating more actively. It's just really hard from the West Coast, as we've seen from various people complaining about time zones. But yeah, it's just hard. I will catch a few of the talks if I can, but yeah, the social aspect is going to be hard, and the conversations are going to be harder. I found CF Summit virtual to be very valuable, but with KubeCon being so huge, I don't know if it would have the same feel, because we had just the single track, and we sort of we're a smaller community that knows each other better, and so we were able to connect. But I find virtual KubeCon a bit disorienting, to be honest. I think we'll call this a quorum of interested parties in Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry. So as I said before, welcome to the Kubernetes SIG, Tuesday, August 18th, 2020. We're already recording, so we don't have to kick that off. I would like to thank Benjamin Fuller for agreeing to talk to us about logging today. And so if you're ready, Ben, I'd be happy to just turn this over to you.
Yeah, I should be ready, or at least as ready as I'll ever be. Let me see if I can share my screen here. So I actually have these, I posted the slideshow, and I can do it again in the chat, and it should have notes to go along with it, I believe. I haven't looked at the specific file yet too closely, except for the PDF, and I don't believe that one has notes, but the two, I would hope that the two other ones do have notes. So I'm Ben Fuller. I'm the anchor of Logging Egress, formerly the Logregator team. I just wanted to talk a little bit about logging, like what was the past of, or I should say, what is the present in a lot of ways of logging on CF in terms of like the previous BARSH architecture. What have we learned during that period of time, and what have we created, and how are we bringing that forward into cf-for-k8s? And so I think the first thing I want to talk about is like, oftentimes it's easy to look at one small section of CF and say, this is what CF is, and this is who we serve. But we actually serve a lot more than a single person when we're making CF for logs. So the initial people we often think about is when you CF push an app, you want to see logs come out. And when you call CF logs on the command line, you see logs. And this is something that is indeed what we do to a larger degree. But it's not the only subset of people we do things for. And one of the other big things that we do is serve platform managers. So people who deploy CF often want to take all of their logs and put it somewhere else, whether that be like a bucket somewhere or an external observability tool, or something else. They want to take all their logs and egress it off of the platform. And this is a use case that comes up, that we hear a lot of problems for. A lot of it comes around scaling. A lot of it comes around like making sure that the platform can integrate with the tool that they're using. But it's something that we hear come up a lot, and it's something that we've had trouble serving in the past. And in those terms, the group that actually wants these logs egressed isn't always the group that is deploying the CF. Sometimes you have a large group of people, you have application developers in that group, you have platform managers, but you also have a separate group of people who want to ensure that all of the logs either go off platform, either to make sure that application developers have observability in some other form besides CF logs. So like a dashboard, a pane, or to make sure that logs are retained for some sort of compliance reasons, either for security or for legal requirements. We also work with partners and service teams, partners being often the kind of groups that observability teams work with. So we're talking about people who develop panes and observability tools to view logs. And we are also talking about services in terms of like add-ons to the platform. People who make service brokers for CF often want to have logs exposed to developers as well. And that's something people we work with to try and make sure those logs are exposed. And then of course, component authors, other people who are making CF, who want to make sure their logs, CAPI logs, router logs, all sorts of things, get into the log stream as well, and are visible to application developers, are sent to external compliance teams, and are visible to platform managers, all these sorts of things. And so I wanted to briefly take a look at this, and this is the current architecture for Logaggregator. Now, I'm not going to get into too much detail in this picture. I just wanted to show it briefly to say this is what it is, but it mostly sums to, we've got a VM, we've got a thing that wants to emit logs. This could be Diego is a big example of this. Logs, which I say, in this case, I say stuff because it could be metrics, go to an agent. Those things, those logs or metrics, go to other agents. Those agents send it to VMs, which communicate with other VMs, which are then contacted by some sort of external user. And by external, it could be within the platform, it could be outside the platform, it could be all sorts of things. But it's some user of the logging system in general who wants to get the logs. And so in general, what we've learned, or some of the things we've learned over the years, is that aggregation isn't scalable, or at least it's difficult to scale in a way that isn't very redundant. So we have Dopplers in the original diagram here. We have Dopplers, traffic controllers, and reverse lock proxies. And while this is something that has helped in some ways, it also has run into scaling limitations. And it's something that even though it's supposed to make it easier to consume from the system, there's usually a separate sense of like redundant scalability beyond that. And so one of the things we've been working towards is moving towards agent-based architectures. We did this with scalable syslog, and we've done this even more with these new syslog agents. And this is something that has scaled a lot higher as a top level, but is just also a lot easier for a lot of our customers to scale than the old fire hose patterns. People would look at the fire hose and they'd be like, how much Dopplers do I need? How much traffic controllers do I need? How big should they be? And this was always very difficult to answer. Whereas when we're looking at agents, it's only about, how much footprint do they consume on a specific VM that is producing logs, and how do I make sure I have a HA architecture to receive those logs, something that you usually need anyways to service logs into anything substantially big. Something we've also learned is that people have a lot of difficulty working with a fire hose, because I'm not going to say, oh, shoot, proprietary is maybe a little bit of a stretch here, but the logregator interface, whether it's the gRPC fact of it, or just the fact that we're talking about envelopes as a concept, is something that's very sticky, but also like has a higher barrier to entry than a lot of people would like, and it often leads to difficulty changing things, because people spend a lot of time working on a nozzle, and then we change things and people aren't too happy about it. One of the things we've been looking and working towards a lot is moving messages to syslog. A lot of old sysadmin patterns follow this syslog pattern, and it's been very successful. We've had some people using HTTP over JSON. It's not as performant as syslog, but it's something that is easy to integrate with. And it's just something that we've been trying to work towards, making sure our interfaces are widely adopted. The interfaces we choose are as widely adopted as possible and are as little custom as possible. We've learned that people want to filter things. So the oldest version I can think of the fire hose, you connect, you say, I want everything, and you get everything. And there is a degree of filtering, but a lot of consuming all the logs of the entire platform, while it is one big use case, it isn't necessarily always your use case. Sometimes you want smaller subsets of platform logging data, and that's something that we haven't been as good as sometimes in the past at exposing to people. One thing we've learned as well is that logs and metrics are different. Something that one of the big problems is that metrics are compressible, and treating them like logs doesn't treat them as compressible, which often leads to a large amount of load going through the system. But we've also learned that as Prometheus has come through and other tooling has come through, there's a lot different methodology on how to make metrics useful that you don't get by treating them like logs. And that's something we would like to do more in the future. And we want to try and use more open source tooling rather than building our own tools. So we've been looking towards FluentD, FluentBit, stuff like that, to try and be able to leverage the open source tools to deliver CF outcomes rather than always first seeking to deliver the outcome as quickly as possible. I hope that's something that we start to see benefits going forward, but we've also seen this in other parts of CF as we've moved towards cf-for-k8s. Even moving towards Kubernetes is kind of one of the outcomes of trying to leverage more open source products. And we've also learned that something that we've always kind of known is that context gives logs value. Knowing that hello world exists as a log has some degree of value, but it's a lot more valuable to know that my application is saying hello world. And it belongs to me and it's in this place. And that's what we've learned over the years. And oh, sorry, there's one more point. We also want to use this opportunity to try and take some of this architecture that is complicated to platform users. It's complicated to people managing, building the platform. And it's all sorts of complicated to understand in all sorts of ways, and try and look at an interface first approach and then try and fulfill that interface rather than taking all the specifics over, a lot of which are either unnecessary or built for backward compatibility reasons, which aren't as prevalent. So hopefully we can, so one of the ways to look at what we're doing right now is that we have inputs coming into Fluentd and outputs. And this is our current like architecture diagram. Things come into Fluentd, we send it to outputs. And right now we only have one output, which is log cache. And we only have about 2 inputs. But I think the big way we want to think about logging going forward is as Cloud Foundry, we have a feature. The feature is drains. Drains are our concept, and we would like to expose those to the outside world. And in so much that we expose drains, we would like to expose interfaces to anyone within the platform to emit their logs in a way that will be able to work with CF drains. We've been working on getting logs in that are annotated with the correct data, and then we'll at some point work to make sure those get sent to various different destinations besides log cache, but log cache first. And we've been working on the fluent formatted ingress to try and work on the important use case of injected logs into logstream. And so there are some things we're hoping to work towards in the future. There's some vague thoughts of platform logs. In the past, platform logs and application logs were served by entirely different architectures. We have syslog release that has been managed by Bosch, managed by a syslog team, and at some points managed by the logging team itself. And this is something that, given that we're now on the same architecture, on the same level playing field with applications, it might be useful to consider how we can consolidate these two to be more consistent and more usable for everyone. But this is something that we haven't had a lot of time to work on, let alone put specific thought into yet. We would like to, at some point, possibly consider more input methods for how we can expose things to components and services, especially as people start to do more Kubernetes things like produce Kubernetes events, if that ends up being a thing. And then more outputs. Syslog is somewhat used, but it's not universally used. It would be nice to have a small set of outputs that could service as many people as we can. And with that, I ask if there's any questions.
Yeah, I have a question, but that was really great, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask a question, or was there already one?
Yeah, go ahead, Vlad.
Thanks. So I've been thinking about this logging that we do with Irene, right, in the picture and on Kubernetes. And I want to ask again, just to make sure that I'm not missing anything obvious. So the logging problem and the metrics problem is something that's shared with Kubernetes itself. So presumably we want to overlap as much as we can with what Kubernetes is doing under us and try to minimize the amount of new mechanisms we bring in, right? So I'm wondering, have you thought about that? And do you think it's absolutely necessary that we bring in something like Fluentd all the time? Given that in some cases, for example, on GKE, there's already a Fluentd there.
That is something I think we have considered. One of the big things, even though there is a Fluentd that comes with some clusters, it's in a lot of ways not configured to work with or consider the architecture of CF. One of the big use cases is log cache, which does need to get application logs in it to serve CF logs. But this is something that's been on the top of our minds. But as well, trying to take all of the logs. I think there's a very CF-centric lens that people want to see their logs in that I think is often not served by a generic Kubernetes pattern.
Right, so the difference that I see with CF logs versus kube control logs is that kube control just gives me, standard error, standard out, and CF logs aggregates some stuff, right? It aggregates Diego cell output, cloud controller output, right? Everything that's pertinent to my app. So you're saying that is this the feature that's missing from the Kubernetes layer?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily missing from the Kubernetes layer. It's not like, I think, as far as my understanding goes, while there is a very generic Kubernetes way to look at logs, and I think that's valuable in a lot of sense, people often are using CF because they don't want to use just Kubernetes. And while it's a tool, Kubernetes is a great tool for us to leverage going forward in to empower CF. I think it's something that there's a lot of difficulties in just looking at it from, oh, this is a Kubernetes, just Kubernetes, because of those previous reasons. I think while we're moving, I'm sorry, give me a second. I think that making sure that we both expose logs as far as egress pattern, and while that to some degree exists for GKE, people often want to have, or various other Kubernetes architectures, people often aren't as aware of where that's going, or aren't as in control, at least to my understanding, of where those logs go. And that's something that we are very aware of, for at least some subset of people using CF, absolutely needs to be there. But I think as well, the ability when you're deploying your own FluentD, or when you're deploying your own logging egress pattern, to very much put that lens of CF in front of the log data, I think provides a lot of value that you miss by just looking at logs from standard out and saying this is what logs are. Logs from standard out on Kubernetes, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I'm not sure if I explained my worry clearly enough. Yeah, I'm just thinking, there's a way to stream logs in Kubernetes. It doesn't feel like we're taking advantage of that at all, but we're building a system that's parallel to that. And I assume that if someone is going to deploy Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes, it might not be the only workload that they have, and they will have tooling to consume logs and stuff from from other stuff that's running on Kubernetes, and their apps are also going to be on Kubernetes. So I'm thinking, is there a way to offer all of these capabilities maybe at a lower layer, not just Cloud Foundry, and take advantage of what Kubernetes already has?
Sure.
Now, to provide others with some context here, I just want to interject that IreneX implements a logging interface for kubecf, which is different, right? It's not, and it was designed to leverage the Kubernetes logging infrastructure as thoroughly as possible and do as little as possible. Can you explain how that is different and how you think that might be used, Vlad? Because I think that might be where this question is coming from.
So for that IreneX component, we just left the older logging system in place, and we removed the logging agent. Well, removed. There are no more Diego cells, right? So instead of having that logging agent on the Diego cells, we wrote an IreneX component that acted as a bridge, acted as a logging agent that sucked in logs from the Kubernetes API and just streamed them over to Doppler, I think, right? I think Doppler. So it just acts as a bridge. It's actually called a Irene Logregator bridge.
Yeah. Do we lose any of the context we were talking about? The stuff that is important for the Cloud Foundry lens on the logs, or do we inject that? Is that information preserved?
Yeah. So in that setup, we don't lose anything. Everything is preserved, but it does have drawbacks, right? It does need the entire Logregator system. That's I agree with the presentation that we probably want to move away from that system in the Kubernetes world. But yeah, we
So
don't
given
lose
that
anything right now.
So given that you're streaming directly from the API, it doesn't have to be deployed on the same cluster as the workloads are on, is what we're saying, right?
Actually, it doesn't. That's true. We haven't tested anything like that, but I guess that would be true. But it is in cluster, so you deploy that component next to everything, and it just watches to see when new Irene apps get deployed, and then just streams logs whenever they're needed.
I think in a lot of ways we think of what we've built on cf-for-k8s as similar to that bridge, or similar to the concept of that bridge. I think while we haven't used Kubernetes tail or any of those sorts of things, we're specifically doing the more direct method. It is something we've considered, but it's been closer to patterns that we as the development team have experienced and used in the past. And so that's the reason for those current patterns as they exist right now. I think if we had more pressure to deploy outside the cluster, we might be looking at different methods.
DJ, can I call out your question from the chat? Can the output be teed so that Kube native tools and logging infrastructure sees it as well?
Does that make sense to people? I was looking at things whilst also listening to the conversation, but I guess that seemed like the logical way of maybe addressing what Vlad was saying, of being able to pipe stuff both through Kube's native logging infrastructure and then having the CF stuff on top, so that you could get it out in both ways if you wanted to and were willing to take that performance hit.
I think they might be in both places already, at least in terms of like how we're getting things from annotated pods. They should just always be going to standard out and still be going to standard out. The question is probably injected logs, which might not be in standard out, but we might be able to consider changing that pattern.
So all the CF value add stuff will only come through the CF path, like the root.
Yeah, at the moment, yes.
Cool, thanks.
I know sort of a pattern we've seen also on the metric side is, we've kind of, I think both the logs and metrics, we've started from this place of trying to match the existing app developer APIs so that we can support the CF CLI and various clients that app developers might have, CF logs being kind of the popular one, but there's other ways to even look at logs and metrics using CF. And that has kind of opened up all these other opportunities adjacent, where we can continue, we have FluentD running, we can provide more features from it. Similar, we're kind of running into similar things on the metric side where, matching those APIs, it doesn't exclude you from doing any of the Kubernetes native things. Those are all still available to you. But we now have components that can provide some operator features as well.
Cool. Any other questions? This has been really, really interesting for me. But I don't know what further questions to ask. I suppose we'll make these slides available for people with the notes as Ben mentioned. I'm not going to try and summarize this in the meeting notes, and I'll just sort of point a reference to the material. We have time now, so we only had one presentation for this this session. I would advise people to check the cf-for-k8s Slack poll for the next session. I think we have 2 items, which I don't have in front of me, for consideration. But I think the coolest one is Yui's idea that we should actually take a chunk of time in the next cf-for-k8s SIG or Kubernetes SIG and do a brainstorm on topics for a few of these meetings out. So that will, I think, happen next meeting. So we'll bring your ideas and bring your friends, bring people who you think might have an interest in steering this conversation or adding to this conversation, and we'll get some ideas down for subsequent meetings so that we can talk about the future. Yui?
The other topic I suggested was perhaps having the CF networking team talk about their app identity proposal. I think they put out a proposal recently and thought that might be interesting for them to present or just for folks to discuss.
And I think there can be definitely room for that as well. In an hour, we could probably do both things, brainstorm ideas and hear an overview of that proposal, which definitely needs to be talked about. It was great that I've seen it's gotten a lot of feedback on the document, but it looks complex. I haven't got my head around it. I don't know if any of the others here have reviewed that yet, but yeah, it's likely we'll have time for both. But we'll hand that back off to Barrett when he returns. Any other topics of interest or urgency to our community that we want to bring out while we're here? I want to just open the floor. Okay, well, it's been swell. Thank you so much, Ben, for that presentation. Thanks for questions and comments. Let's go see if we can tune into some KubeCon sessions today in the midst of our other stuff. So thanks very much, everyone, for coming.
Great job filling in, Troy.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.